Kitzhaber, you famously said that Oregon was ungovernable toward the end of your second term, so what's changed?
Well, let me give you a context for that comment, which, interestingly enough, I can't find written down anywhere, recorded anywhere, but it somehow developed a life of its own. The context was a lot of frustration over 5 special sessions where my position was I believed we needed new revenue, but if we couldn't get it, I would sign budget cuts. But what I wouldn't do is sign bills that created sort of funny money to fund long-term state programs. And what I was treated with, I mean, the Democrats wouldn't raise taxes because they were worried they wouldn't gain control. The Republicans wouldn't cut the budgets, and I got this series of, one was funding one-year K-12 operation bonding the lottery. One was moving the last K-12 payment from June 30th to July 1st, which created $400 million in that budget, and I was very frustrated. And the context was a speech down at the Eugene Rotary in January before I left office, and I said basically that if we continue to, if the purpose of public debate in Oregon continues to be the acquisition of partisan majorities without, and without using those majorities to solve problems, and if we continue to have a runaway initiative process and deeply bitter stakeholder politics, the state's going to become ungovernable. And I would argue that you just have to look south to California to see where that takes us. And one of the reasons that I decided to do this, essential reasons, I do think Oregon is heading right in that direction. I think we've got 2 to 4 years to fundamentally change our vector, our trajectory in Oregon. I think we're going to be looking at bankruptcy, just like California is. I think we're going to be looking at a dwindling ability to act in the public interest. And I do believe people are beginning to recognize that.
So as a consequence, how would you today rate your 2 terms of government?
Pretty good.
Give us a letter grade and then support your grade.
I would give it B+.
Okay.
For the first 6.5 years, we had a great economy. We, on the economic development front, we made multi-million-dollar investments in rural infrastructure. We secured direct passenger flights to 3 countries in Asia. We negotiated the initial negotiations that brought Lufthansa in. We brought direct Korean Air 747 service into Portland. We engineered a great deal of high-tech investment in the state of Oregon. We created the quality education model on the education front. We implemented the Oregon Plan for Salmon Watersheds and the Healthy Streams Initiative on the Natural Resource Front. I think it was a good ride. We did this with the Republican legislature. And the real friction that came in was right at the end, and it was essentially these 5 special sessions where the legislative body was paralyzed.
And to the degree that you don't give yourself an A, that's because what did not happen?
I think a couple of things. I think that one of my shortcomings when I took office was that I came out of 14 years in the legislature, and I think to some extent I was a 91st legislator. But I got deeply involved in details of policy, which I don't think is a bad thing, but I don't think I fully utilized the pulpit that the governor's office affords. I mean, it's important to be involved with legislative details, but it's also important to be using that office to be out there, talking to Oregonians and trying to drive the agenda from the top as well. That's a lesson learned. Second lesson learned is, and this should have been much more obvious, I suppose, but it is insane to try to manage Oregon 2 years at a time around a biennial budget. How many businesses have a 2-year event horizon? And one of the changes I wish I'd thought about when I was there was trying to create an 8 or 10-year budget frame with both expenditures and projections. And you can't justify return on investment for early childhood expenditures in a 2-year time frame. So that would be the second. And the third one is, I don't think you can put together a legislative agenda the day after the election in November and expect it to get anywhere. You have to basically, the whole campaign has to be a run-up to those to what you want to happen in the legislature. So those are.
So are you? Let's talk about a couple of your specifics. The quality education plan. Are you of the belief that kids are better educated today in Oregon than they were before governor?
In general, probably not.
So then, okay, you got a quality education plan through, what's the consequence?
Well, there hasn't been a real consequence. We created the quality education model, and then I was involved in passing ballot measure 1, which created a constitutional requirement for the legislature to sort of do some cost accounting and demonstrate how far we were falling behind that and explain why, which has been largely ignored. There's a lesson there. I think that that part of the problem with the educational system is obviously part of it is a funding problem. There's no question about that. But I think part of it is a structural problem. We've got the way we fund education is utterly opaque, and it is siloed. The higher ed budget is created by the Board of Higher Education in a silo. The community college budget is created in a silo by the Board of Education. The K-12 distribution programs in statute, and you got a variety of early childhood programs over here, and they all move independently through the legislative process, and we fund largely on reward, not even attendance. So the health of universities and school districts to some extent depends on the number of students enrolled, not how well they serve. And I think part of the challenge is to create a much more transparent, accountable budgeting process. And I am proposing a single, unified, transparent education budget where you shift funding from enrollment-based funding for institutions to performance-based funding for students.
So how do you get away from the classic educational trap where if you're funding based on performance, you're just going to be funding like in high school in Eugene South and other affluent schools or school districts where kids are showing up because their parents are employed and engaged?
Well, when I'm talking about performance-based funding, there are 2 levels of accountability that I think we lack today. One of them is, since Measure 5, the legislature has become the major funder of at least primary and secondary education, but all they do is write a big check. And then they expect the school districts to figure it out. When I'm talking about performance-based funding, I'm talking about the state having the ability to identify school districts and schools that are struggling and help diagnose what the problem is. Is that problem because are they socioeconomic issues? Is it that you got 8 languages spoken there? Is it because half the kids are learning English? And then try to direct resources into those districts to help bring the whole system up. There's school districts that don't need a lot of help. They're doing a really good job. So the idea is to be much more diagnostic, if you will, and identify it. So that's the accountability for the legislature. The legislature becomes a full partner with the school districts in trying to make sure all our kids get across the bar. The districts ultimately have to be held accountable for student outcomes, and that requires, and this created a little bit of a rub with my friends at the OAA, you have to have some way, objective way to measure student, a formative-based measurement of student and teacher performance. Not merit pay, not performance on a standardized test, but a way to see if student A is here, are they making progress? That gives you the ability to help the individual student. It also gives you the ability to provide a continuing professional development for teachers who may need some assistance. So those are the 2 components, I think, that make the system work.
Bill, could I just switch for a second?